All right, good evening and welcome. My name is Simon Gutierrez. I'm on the communications team at Pacific Power. I want to welcome you all to our Wildfire Customer Forum. We're going to be talking about our wildfire mitigation efforts. Mitigation, a fancy word for what we do to protect the communities that we serve from the risk of wildfire. We'll take a moment to thank the folks in attendance for coming out. This is meant to be a conversation. This is a presentation on our part, but we're also here to listen. So we appreciate you coming out. I know we have some public safety partners and some local elected officials and tribal representatives in the audience, and we appreciate you being here. I just wanted to also mention that our local regional business manager, Tony McLavy, is in the audience as well. Some of you may know her, and Horace Ward, our local emergency management representative. So thank everyone for being here. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a bit of a presentation. Kind of looks like a PowerPoint where we're going to share some high-level information about what we're doing on the ground physically and through some of our programs to help guard against the risk of potential wildfire starts. Wildfire mitigation is a huge priority for the company. We've invested upwards of $500 million over the last 5 years and have committed to investing $2 billion more over our 6-state service area over the next 5 years. So it's a big priority for the company. The communities we serve are very important to us, and we're doing whatever we can to make sure that we're not a part of the problem. So to start off, I want to introduce some of the folks here. We've got Chester Lampkin. He's one of our meteorologists. He'll be giving a presentation on situational awareness and how we use our wide array of weather stations across our service area to stay one step ahead of the weather and fire behavior. Then we have Nora Yatsoff. She's our Director of Emergency Management. She'll be talking about various things that you can do around your home to protect your space from the risk of wildfire, and some of the things that we do as a company to help some of the folks navigate the process of some of the outages that can be associated with wildfire, such as a public safety power shutoff, and just some general preparation tips for you and around your home. Alan Barrett, at the end there, he's our Vice President of Operations for Pacific Power, and he'll run you through some of the basic procedural and also some of the technical things that we employ to guard against the risk of wildfire, some of the settings on our equipment, and the rationale behind some of the decisions that we're making. Before we get into all that, though, I want to take a moment. We're going to show you a video that gets into some of these high-level details, kind of a base starting point for the conversation. So let's take a look at that video.
It's important for a utility to prepare for major events, including storms, to keep our customers safe in the communities that we serve. PacifiCorp, over the last several years, has put a lot of effort and thought into wildfire safety, wildfire mitigation across the territory that we have, specifically identifying the areas that are of higher risk and impact and consequence.
We're making very prudent investments to improve reliability, improve the resiliency of, and then more importantly, to prevent wildfire risks.
Grid hardening is anything that you do to improve your system, whether it be to add technology or to rebuild a line, replace poles, replace wire. All of those things add to the reliability of the system.
Covered conductor, it's got a bare wire in the center, but it's actually covered insulation. The point of it is if a tree or something were to come into the line and make contact, it would help in preventing a wildfire from starting. It can actually be beneficial year-round. From winter, branches being laid into the line, it'll actually keep the power on.
We're rebuilding literally hundreds of miles of lines and adding intelligent devices out into that will give us better situational awareness, real-time control, and information right at our fingertips so that we can react faster.
The deployment of additional field devices such as field reclosers us to de-energize from a point out that impacts only the necessary customers.
We can actually open or close these switches remotely instead of having to get somebody to come out in the field in one of those locations.
We're deploying several hundred weather stations across our service territory. Those weather stations are used to feed information into our weather modeling and give our forecasters better handle of what's happening in our system.
Weather is impact on system reliability, on your electric service. We are currently running high-resolution forecast models. We're creating hourly 30-year data sets of historical weather conditions. We're combining all of this with wildfire software that allows us to simulate millions of wildfires every day so that we can map out the risk and the consequence of wildfires based on current forecast conditions. So all of this information allows us to better understand what's coming and where we need to focus to stay ahead of those wildfire risks.
Vegetation management is ensuring that we don't have trees that grow into the power lines. It's all managing defective or hazardous trees, working around poles and making sure that we have clearance at the base of poles. And so this is a perfect example, looking up at that tree right there with the dieback that started. And typically, when you have about 1/3 to 2/3 of the tree that's dying, it's very difficult for the tree to come back from that.
So investments in wildfire live on beyond just the reduction of wildfire risk. These are investments that help the system be more resilient in the long term, through the winter storms, through the summer wind events, provide value to the customers for years to come.
So I apologize for some of the glitches in the video there. Hopefully some of that message still got across. We don't usually have that issue, so again, apologies again. I mentioned this was going to be a conversation, so with that in mind, we're going to have a presentation for you to start the conversation off. We will have a question and answer session at the conclusion of that presentation, and we do want to hear from you. So if you're here and you have questions, we're going to do our very best to answer them. We may not have an answer right today, but we will promise to look into whatever is raised and potentially get back to you with an answer. Say if you share your email address, we can send you an email, phone call, however you'd like us to communicate with you. But to start things off, we're going to get into situational awareness, a little bit of our meteorology programs and how we stay one step ahead of the weather and fire behavior. And for that, Chester Lampkin.
Thanks a lot, Simon. How's it going this evening, everyone? Good, good. Hopefully you enjoyed the food. It's a beautiful day, and summer is well underway, and we're very much aware of it. In meteorology, of course, we are watching the weather all times of the year, of course. We talk about winter storms and, you know, the spring rains and et cetera, but this time of year, we're all about what's happening in the wildfire space and the weather that promotes extreme wildfire behavior. So we'll talk a little bit about the situational awareness in the meteorology department and how we're helping operations operate our electrical system and make sure that things are running as smooth as possible, and how we can lower the risk as well of wildfire on our system. So very quickly, I like to tell the listeners a little bit about what I do and how I came to be at Pacific Power, especially since I'm pretty new to the utility industry. I've been a meteorologist for 19 years, but I just came to Pacific Power just a year ago. And I bring that up because just a year ago, I was a utility customer, meaning I was just like you. I had no idea how any of this worked. I had no clue about the dangers that we face in the utility industry, how hard the people work to keep the power on. And so I'm very appreciative of the work that we're doing here at Pacific Power and what our various teams throughout the company are doing as well to keep the community safe. Now, you all have already noticed we've had some pretty warm days here in the last month or so. We're in the summer season now. Meteorologically speaking, we start summer in the 1st of June, and this is the time of year where we start to see more and more wildfire starts and increased fire behavior. And that's something that we're going to be dealing with for the next several months. And that's why you all are here to listen and find out how we're lowering that risk of wildfire on our system. Wildfire has become more prominent and more prevalent as well across the western United States. We've noticed that risk creeping northward. California, had the worst of the wildfire risk for the longest time, but now that risk has moved farther north as well, and it now encompasses Oregon and Washington as well. And even though we've had wildfires since before any of our ancestors were here, it is impacting us more and more now because of a variety of reasons, and changes in climate, weather patterns, where we live as well, and how we interface with the wildland and how the wildland and the urban areas interface as well. In meteorology, my top job is to stay ahead of the forecast, stay ahead of the weather, and keep our community safe. That's what we want to do in meteorology, and we want to do that for everybody in Pacific Power as well. We're one of the first companies across the United States in the utility space that has invested in all this great technology that we have available to us, in-house meteorology, in-house expertise, meteorologists that work for the company. Some of the technology you can see in the video I'm going to show you, and some of the stuff that you can see back on our display in the back. So if you have questions about that, feel free to ask it later, and we'll all talk about it after the presentation as well. For us in meteorology, we're just we're concerned about the short-term risk of a wildfire on our system, our network, and how it can impact our community and the people who work for our company as well. So it's all about situational awareness, knowing what is happening now, today, what fires may have erupted in the last day, couple of days or weeks or so, what is potentially coming down the pipeline, weather patterns that unfortunately can lead to extreme fire behavior. So for us, we're analyzing data in real time. That data helps us predict the conditions that could lead to wildfires. And with that data, we make weather forecasts that we provide to the operations of our system. Our operations department will operate the system in different ways in the short term and long term in order to mitigate or lower the risk of wildfire. And again, for us, it's all about that situational awareness, knowing what's happening now, and we're also looking ahead to the future for the next several days. Well, how do we do that? We do it with daily risk forecasting. We make a 5-day forecast that we provide to operations and everybody else in the company, so they know what that forecast weather is going to be. And we're not really concerned about necessarily the temperature. We're more concerned about winds and humidity and how dry our fuels are, the available fuels. Temperature does play an impact, especially when it's really hot, but that leads to more drying, and that dries out your fuels, and that could lead to wildfire that can behave in an extreme way. All right, so we are a team of 5, soon to be 6. 3 of us work in our main headquarters just down the way in Portland, and the other 2, soon to be 3 meteorologists, they work at our sister company, Rocky Mountain Power. But we all work as a team. We discuss fire threats across both companies every single day of the week, 5 days a week. And we also have a meteorologist on duty watching the weather for the entire company. And we actually have 2 meteorologists on duty every single day of the week. I'm the meteorologist on duty today that covers the western part of our company, Pacific Power. So I actually made the weather forecast for this area this morning before I came out here to Yakima. But we have someone who's always watching the weather. There's a duty covering the weather. We're making that forecast that goes out 5 days into the future, and we're watching the weather basically anywhere we provide power or transmit power along our transmission and our distribution lines. Transmission is the long, taller towers that usually span across multiple counties and states, and the distribution is the power lines that come straight to your home or your business or wherever you are. So for your power company, we are watching the weather where you live. We have weather stations linked to every single line of distribution and transmission throughout the company. So we have weather data that comes to us, that belongs to us and is associated with every single line. We also have computer modeling that is associated with every single line of our entire territory, including here in Yakima. Of course, in the winter, we're concerned about winter storms, snow, ice, extreme cold. But in the summer, it's all about fire season. Strong, gusty winds, the development of drought, and when you have extreme heat as well, or prolonged periods of heat, which tend to lead to faster drying out of the vegetation, which unfortunately leads to more fire starts and extreme fire behavior. How do we watch the weather? How do we provide all this information? Well, we have weather stations. You could probably see a couple around town here in the Yakima Valley. There's a map on the right side that kind of gives you a little outline of that. We'll zoom in just a minute. But that's what our weather stations look like. They're mounted usually on our poles. Most of them are solar powered. They provide all the stuff you get from a television weather report: wind, temperature, humidity, how much rain or lack of rain. For us, all those elements, of course, are extremely important. We're always watching the wind. Wind is like the #1 enemy of utilities, so it's such a big deal for us. We have 454 of those weather stations throughout our two companies, and they provide 24-hour, 7 days a week monitoring of weather conditions. Weather data, again, is tied to every circuit. Everybody is tied to a weather station, so wherever you are, wherever you live, or wherever your company is, or whoever you work for, we've got a weather station that is tied specifically to your location. We provide that data for free right there on that website, pacificpowerweather.com. You can check it out. It actually has the little Washington South Central section, and those are some of the weather stations that we have throughout the area here. Just some, and it's not all of them. But in general, you can get that information.
With more extreme weather.
Excuse me, I'm first. Anytime you want to check out that weather, I'm gonna plug this a couple more times. PacificPowerWeather.com. We provide our weather data for free up there, and some of our in-house computer modeling as well. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So we have the weather stations. There's that local map I was referring to. You can see Yakima there, and then towards the bottom, Tapanish, and down towards Sunnyside, those areas. So all Pacific Power, and we go all the way up the Nile as well, and up to Wenas Lake and that area. We've got weather stations all throughout this entire area. Okay, so what's great about these weather stations, besides that we own them and we use the data to provide information to operations and how we operate the system? You know, get all the usual stuff: temperature, humidity, rain. But it also helps us understand moisture levels, the moisture levels of the grass, both dead and live moisture. And you're probably wondering, for those who aren't that familiar with fire, well, why do we care about the dead moisture of vegetation? It's fuel. Dead moisture is fuel. So the grass, the way it grows, it comes in for 1 year and then it dies. And often that grass is laying there. It's still there when fires start. It is fuel for fires. So we need to know how much moisture is available in the live fuels, the grass that's alive, the brush that's alive, the trees that are still living in our forests. And we need to know how much moisture may be available in the dead fuels as well. If the dead fuels have a lot of moisture, it's rained a lot recently, you're not likely to see fires. Or if you are going to see fire, you're not going to see extreme fire behavior. Same in the forest as well, which we have a lot of forest here, especially in the upper part of the valley and going farther north and west. Just because there's a tree down on the ground and it's laying there, it doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact on wildfire. Those dead trees, those dead limbs, that's fuel for wildfires, especially at the latter part of the summer. They provide fuels. In fact, sometimes that's the stuff that starts fires, and then it spreads throughout the forest and to the trees, and then we start to see fires spreading from tree to tree. So we need to know the moisture levels of all of the vegetation in our grasslands and in our mountainous areas and into the forest as well, because it all has an impact on fire behavior. It dictates how fast fires can spread as well. We make that data available for free on that website, as I mentioned. And I do want to point out that we don't just work within the company and we only talk to each other in the meteorology department and, you know, how we advise operations and how the whole company works. We also work with our partners. It's super important to know that. We work with the National Weather Service. We work with NIFC and the Geographical Area Coordination Centers. Those are the fire weather forecasters that make fire weather forecasts for the entire country. We work with them. We're on daily calls with them. I was on a call with them this morning. We're on calls with the National Weather Service. We'll talk to local partners, state partners, federal partners, other utilities as well. We meet with them several times a year because we're all in this together. This is a community problem that we're all battling at the same time, not just the utilities, but all sorts of industries. All right, real quick, I want to get to our risk modeling. I only have a couple minutes left. I want to talk about what we are doing in-house to help produce those 5-day forecasts and how we can help keep the system running safely and to protect you all. And again, we talk about that situational awareness, that short-term risk of weather and fire and how it kind of intersects, right? We have our own in-house computer model. We call it a WRF. It's the Weather Research Forecast Model. A lot of companies have WRFs. Usually it's education. Usually it is like universities or research companies. But now utilities are getting into the business of having their own in-house computer model. We run it ourselves. We run it twice a day. It goes out 96 hours, and it provides weather forecast data for every point across our system. It actually covers more than 1 million square miles of the western United States. It covers both Pacific Power and Rocky Mountain Power. And we use that to tie into our utility system, our network of lines, our distribution and transmission. We also took that model, high resolution model, 2-kilometer resolution for those who might know anything about computer modeling. High resolution model, we also ran it backwards, 30 years, so we can get a good baseline of what the weather has done in this area, across the entire West really, 30 years into the past. And we can use that to sort of make benchmarks to say in the future, let's say our 5-day forecast goes out and we see at hour 48 or hour 90, we see this event happening. We can use that to compare it to past events. So if there's an extreme wind event coming to the Yakima Valley, for example, we can examine it and compare it to the past and say, how does that rank? And we'll rank it in a percentage. And if you end up with a top 98 or 99 percentile in wind, for example, that's a day where you're greatly concerned, at least in the summertime, about wildfire risk. Or in the wintertime, you're just concerned about outages on the system. It really depends on the time of year and the conditions that are out there already. But it enables us to have our own data that we can use as benchmarks so that we have better forecasts, so we can better protect the system and protect the community. We also use that data to help power a computer model. It's a wildfire risk modeling that actually will simulate wildfires on our entire system twice a day, hundreds of times. And then it assigns a score and it says, hey, this area, if there was a wildfire at this spot, this area would be the highest risk, or this area maybe not that high. So we can use that to make weather forecasts and predictions about how the fires may behave if they were to ignite. We do that every single day of the year. It's pretty cool stuff. So how does it work? Let me show you a video here. Should be on the next slide. There it is. That's our in-house computer model. This particular display is showing you the wind. So the reason why I'm showing this is because I wanted to find a recent large fire that impacted Pacific Power. And one of the most recent ones for us was the Smith River Complex. You may not be that familiar with it, but it was actually the largest fire in California last year, all of 2023. And it occurred in Northern California. And our company stretches all the way down to Northern California, Crescent City, down through Wairika. That's where we're showing you. So that's the map here. What I was showing you before in that previous slide was the wind forecast. What I'm showing you now is the lightning forecast. It's one of the many elements that we use to, predict weather, of course. Lightning is super important because it leads to a lot of fire starts. And in this particular case, in August of last year, we had multiple fire starts from a lightning event that occurred at the very beginning of August. It was the first few days of August. That's the lightning parameter showing up there. And exactly where that lightning occurred is about where we had fires pop up. We had several down there. We had several throughout Oregon as well. Luckily, it didn't make it as far north as the Cascades here in Washington. But you can see this next imagery here. This is from that wildfire software I was talking about earlier. It's called Wildfire Enterprise Analyst. And it can simulate fires. It takes our weather data. It takes various inputs from the software company that we contract with. And they have a software that we use every single day, this Wildfire Analyst software, that will simulate what a fire would do. Now, this assumes that no one's fighting that fire, which is not always the case. Oftentimes, firefighters are out there doing it. But this is what would happen at the Smith River Complex, beginning of August, if nobody was fighting that fire. And what's that purple line there? That's our transmission line. we actually use this. This was operational. We were using this to decide when we would have to do a de-energization of that line based on when that fire would go through that line. So we have that capability. We are using that capability all the time here in the wildfire season. I want to show you this as well. We have other elements too. These are different elements that come from a group of fire parameters that fire weather forecasters use throughout the United States. We have access to that as well, and this is what we call energy release component. You don't need to know the science behind it. Just know in this particular case, on those particular days in the beginning of August when the Smith River Complex started, see those orange areas right along the coast? That's when the ERC, or that energy release component, was at its highest. We had lightning, we had energy release component numbers that were high, we had dry fuels, we got multiple fires, and we got large fires as well. And they lasted for well over a month in many areas of California. So just very interesting stuff that we're able to do. We're using this software every day so that we can help prevent, adding to the problem of wildfire across the United States and across our service territory. So again, PacificPowerWeather.com. Lastly, I just want to show you this slide here because I've gone a little over time. I apologize to my fellow speakers. But this is, again, you can go to the website. You can check out weather stations in your area. You can click on a weather station. If it's not the one near your house, you can click on the map and you can find a weather station nearby. And click on the weather station, you actually get our weather data, our raw weather data. It's the data we're looking at: wind, humidity, temperatures. You get these pretty little graphs that go out several days into the future. We use this to make our forecast. I used it this morning to look at the wind forecast for this area specifically because, you guys get a lot of wind here and you've had plenty over the last few weeks, I should say. So that data is freely available. Check it out if you can. And I've pretty much come to my time. So I just want to talk, again, that's what we're doing in the short term. What we're going to talk about is how we are making the system stronger and better in the long term, and how we're running the system differently. So we're going to go to Alan. He's going to speak about that, and then followed by Nora. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Chester. As you can tell, Chester's got a lot of passion for what he does. And he's got a lot of data at his fingertips, right? And so what I'm going to speak about is how we take all that data, all that risk modeling, all that situational awareness, all that information coming from those weather stations. So once that risk has been identified, what do we do about it? That's the next natural question. Since the risk has been identified, what's the next step? And so I'm going to talk about the operational practices and the tools that we have to help mitigate that fire risk that's been identified, all right? And I'm going to talk about that in two buckets. And so the first one is system hardening. I'm going to be talking about what we're doing to our system to harden it, make it more resilient. You saw some of it in the videos. You can see some of it back there in the corner in the displays. But I'll talk about what that looks like. And then I'll talk about the operational practices and how that mitigates risk, all right? So those are the two topics that we'll be walking through. But first, let's just take a look at some of the stats for this area. Let's look at the Yakima area. What does the system look like here? So here's a map of the area showing our transmission lines. And we have 1,100 distribution line miles serving this area, all right? And 230 miles of transmission. So there's a lot of miles in the area that's providing power to the area, 13 substations. And what you'll also notice, although really hard at this scale, is you see the legend where it talks about service territory, and then in purple it says FHCA, which is the fire high consequence areas. And when we take that information Chester was talking about, we run that risk modeling across the service territory. We're trying to find the areas of highest risk, all right? Where is that in Yakima? Well, in Yakima and the surrounding area, that's not in that top 15% risk. It's not that highest risk across the service territory. Where is it in this area? You got to go northwest. It's up in the Nile area is what has been identified as fire high consequence area. Makes sense? Wooded, complex terrain, that's the highest risk area. What's important to take away from that, right? It's not to say there's no fire risk elsewhere. It's not the highest risk area, all right? And we're trying to mitigate fire risk everywhere we serve in all communities. And so even though that area and the area surrounding Yakima isn't noted as the top 15%, it's still an area that has fire risk. It's still an area that has the ingredients. When you look at those humidity, wind, everything Chester was talking about, every area can have the potential, can have the ingredients for a catastrophic wildfire, right? And so our wildfire mitigation program is going after that. How do we reduce, how do we mitigate that fire risk? Everywhere, not just in the most extreme areas, everywhere. And that's really what these operating practices are targeted at, all right? And so that's an important takeaway, that it's everywhere across our service territory. It's every day of the year. You can look in the news lately, right? And you can see wildfires happening across our country, different parts of the world, where the wildfires are occurring in times of year that you wouldn't have thought of as fire season, and they're happening in places that you didn't think had fire risk, and yet they are catastrophic fires. We're taking that experience and we're saying, what can we put in our wildfire mitigation program? What can we put in our operational practices that help limit that risk? And so that's what we're talking about. So let's go back to that first bucket and that I mentioned, system hardening. Let's go into a little more detail. What exactly do I mean by system hardening? So this is where we'll actually rebuild sections of our line, right? Where do we prioritize that effort? Well, that is prioritized in those highest risk areas. Why is it prioritized to those areas? Well, because we're talking about investing a lot of money. It takes a lot of multiple years for those projects to be completed. So we got to start somewhere. So where are you going to start? You're going to start in the areas of highest risk, right? So for this area, that's up in the Nile area. But what is the system hardening that we would go after? First one, covered conductor, right? So if you think of our distribution system, our transmission system, and you think of the wire going from pole to pole, that bare overhead wire, well, that bare overhead wire has the potential, say, for a branch that's blowing in the wind, hits that bare wire, hits that conductor, there's the potential for a spark. We want to eliminate that, right? So how do you eliminate that potential of something hitting that bare wire? Well, you can cover it. Think of it as like an extension cord, an insulated cord. Just put a cover over it so that it's not bare wire. Still goes pole to pole, it's still overhead, but now when that tree branch hits that line, it's hitting that hard plastic cover over the wire, no longer has that potential for a spark. That branch can continue to the ground. We've reduced the potential for a wildfire ignition, right? So we rebuild overhead lines with covered conductor. When you do that, it can look like a normal cross arm up at the top of a pole and the wires, or we can put it on the spacers, which is that aerial spacer picture there on the slide, which really brings those bundles of wire and brings them real tight together. So that means they're not, instead of being spread 10 feet, more exposed to tree branches or whatever. If you're in a more wooded area where there's trees, we can put them on the spacers, brings it in nice and tight, increases that clearance to the trees that might be nearby. Right? When we rebuild, we look at rebuilding with non-wood alternatives. When you look at our poles, put in fiberglass, steel poles, something that's more resilient, so that if a wildfire does burn through, the system is more resilient, the pole doesn't have to be replaced, the power can be turned on that much more quickly afterwards, right? Doesn't prevent the wildfire, it just means that it can be more resilient to a wildfire that happens in the area. As Chester said, like something like lightning or something like that, there's a lot of reasons that the wildfire can start, burns through the area, we can re-energize that much quicker. The last one, undergrounding, all right? Get asked that a lot. Why don't we just put everything underground? Well, again, it comes down to that's a large investment. It takes a number of years to get that done. Cost of undergrounding compared to the cost of covered conductor, 4 to 5 times more expensive. And they both are dramatically reducing that fire risk. It's just with covered conductor, I can do more areas, I can get more line miles done for the same amount of dollars. And so it's a balance, though. It's not to say we don't do undergrounding, but we look for the opportunities where it makes sense, access, whatever, that it might economically pay off and they come a lot closer to each other. Undergrounding is part of the equation as well. As far as the projects in Yakima, that Nile area that was in the fire high consequence area, we do have a line rebuild project up there. So far, we've accomplished 14 miles, and we have another 7 miles to be completed this year. And then that will finish up that area that goes up in the Nile area. All right, one more aspect of system hardening that I want to talk about, which is the devices that we use that are monitoring the line, and if they detect a disturbance, like a fault, that tree branch example I talked about, when it detects that fault, it opens up. So we have these reclosers, relays that go out on the line. They're constantly monitoring. They're looking for that fault. If it sees it, it opens up very quickly. Well, as part of wildfire mitigation, we install more of those devices out there, continuously monitoring the line, looking to open up. Think of it as like the circuit breaker in your electrical panel at home. You have a different breaker going to each section of your house. If something goes wrong in one of those rooms, the microwave, whatever, it trips and that room loses power. Very similar thing. We put those devices out on the line. It allows us to sectionalize the line down into smaller segments. And so as part of system hardening, we install more of those devices as well. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit away from the system hardening, and now I'm going to talk about that second bucket, that's the operational practices. And this one's getting at more after not what assets can you add or replace. This one's saying, how can we operate the system differently, knowing the conditions that we're operating in? So on those days where there is a higher risk or that time of year, we can use that information to decide how to run the system differently. Even down to when we look at vegetation management, which is, well, I inspect more frequently, and maybe we trim back further when it comes to vegetation management. And so increased clearances, get eyes on it, do different types of inspections, do drones, use helicopters. So it's about getting eyes on our system more often, and then if we find anything, resolving those conditions that much quicker, right? And to make sure our system's in good operating condition all the time. When it comes to veg management, though, it's much more than just staying on a cycle of tree trimming and keeping those clearances. What we're seeing is more and more dead and dying trees. So that when we go out and look at our lines, it's about finding these dead trees that represent a hazard to falling into the line because they're dying, so wind can push them over into the line, identifying those trees and removing them. More and more, that's the volume of activity in vegetation management, is going after those trees, whether they're in our right-of-way or just right outside of our right-of-way, but pose a risk to falling in. All right, beyond vegetation management, though, still looking at those poles, the lines between the poles, the equipment on the poles, those two, all that equipment needs inspecting. And so it's about getting out there and looking at those more often. And if there's anything that needs to be fixed, jumping on those conditions that much quicker. Again, with different types of inspections, infrared inspections. Is the equipment hotter than it should be? Does that represent a connector that should be replaced? Ground patrol, sending somebody out to actually walk all the lines and take a look, using the drones, using the helicopters. That's all part of a good asset management program, which is, again, just making sure that the system's in good condition no matter when it's operating. There's also field practices in this category where we would say, all right, during certain times of year, based on the conditions, what type of equipment should we be taking out on the job? Making sure that we've got the water truck in some locations, making sure we're not driving our vehicles across the grass field, making sure we've got the right equipment, making sure that we've evaluated whether or not we even should be doing that job that day. Should we be doing the job de-energized instead of energized? All these checklist of items are gone through every day to make sure that we're operating the system with a nice balance for the wildfire risk that might be present that day. All right. This category, operational practices, how we run the network, also includes the more proactive de-energizations, right? Where we, and Nora will be talking more about the public safety power shutoff. When we use the information Chester talked about, and we see that it has all the ingredients for a really bad wildfire could be occurring on the horizon, and we can decide, is the risk so high under those extreme wildfire conditions, really dry, really windy, it'd be better to just de-energize, let the conditions ride through, then we'll turn the power back on later, right? That's in this operational practice. So is using those relays and reclosers I talked about and putting them in an even more sensitive mode so that they're that much quicker to open up. and that instead of reclosing back into the line and seeing if once that tree branch scenario kind of falls to the ground, and the recloser normally would try to close back in, see if that tree branch is still there. If it's not, it stays energized. That's great. If it is, it opens up again. Well, when we're running in really sensitive protection mode, we'll just stay open. And we'll want to send somebody out to go manually look at the line before deciding it's safe to re-energize. And so that's an operational practice as well as if there is an active wildfire near the lines, that immediate de-energization, looking to get more information, and deciding when is it safe to re-energize. That's all in the bucket of operational practices for the given wildfire risk on a given day. Now let's watch a short video that's going to describe even more some of those programs I just walked through. The enhanced safety settings, where we run in a more protective mode, public safety power shutoff, and the active wildfire encroachment. So let's watch the video and then I'll add a little more color to it.
At Pacific Power, we're committed to providing the safe, reliable service you count on every day. During conditions such as gusting winds and hot, dry weather, and in areas near trees and other types of vegetation that could ignite, we may need to take certain steps to reduce the potential risk and impact of wildfires. While these safety measures may interrupt your service, they are essential to preventing catastrophic wildfire events. Let's look at 3 of the ways we help protect communities during times of heightened wildfire risk. The first is enhanced safety settings. During times when wildfire risk is elevated, we will adjust the sensitivity of some of our equipment. With these settings activated, our lines will de-energize quicker, within fractions of a second, if a line is contacted by a tree branch or other debris, reducing the risk of a fire ignition. Because of this, there's an increased potential for power to be disrupted and remain off until field crews can visually inspect the lines to determine if power can be safely restored. Next up is the public safety power shutoff. Hotter, drier, and windier weather conditions can create heightened wildfire risk, and we may implement a public safety power shutoff, or PSPS, temporarily shutting off power to specific targeted areas. A PSPS is done in partnership with local emergency management teams, using available communication options to notify customers that power may be turned off, and to keep affected communities informed throughout an enacted shutoff. Once we've determined that the fire risk has passed, we will turn the power back on and restore service. Finally, our wildfire encroachment strategy is another wildfire safety tool that may result in a disruption of your power. When an active wildfire moves close enough to threaten burning into the area of our lines or equipment, we will begin monitoring the fire closely to evaluate its potential spread and impacts to our systems. If the fire is moving too close to our assets, we will do an emergency de-energization of our power lines. This process helps us make the most effective decisions to avoid additional fire risk and protect first responders. Here at Pacific Power, we're dedicated to keeping our customers safe while delivering the power that our communities count on each and every day. And during times of extreme weather events, when wildfire risk is at its highest, our wildfire safety strategies will help protect our customers and the communities that we serve. To learn more, visit us at pacificpower.net/wildfire.
All right, that video adds some good visuals to make sure that you understand the various programs we have with our operating practices. Now, I've worked at Pacific Power for 26 years, and I talked with some of you before the presentation. Pacific Power, utilities in general, have 100 years of culture of wanting to keep the power on. That's in our blood. That's what we want to do. Responding to outages and is about getting the power back on as soon as possible. The wildfire risk that's been increasing in our part of the country in the recent years has changed that for us, right? And now we have these operating practices which talk about de-energization proactively and the immediate kind of emergency de-energization. It goes against our culture as well, and it's recognized that it creates an inconvenience. We recognize it's an It's an impact to our customers that those outages are creating, right? And it's in this goal of reducing the wildfire risk to the communities we serve and deciding when should the power be on and when should it be de-energized, right? And finding that balance. And that's the goal here. And that's what these operating practices are getting after, right? And so when we look at the enhanced safety settings and running the system in a more protective mode, what does that feel like as a customer? It feels like more outages and longer duration outages, because that's what's occurring, right? The equipment has a different setting during these high-risk times of year that will create the outage, and then it will require someone to patrol the line before we restore the power. And it's in that effort to balance out the risk, that fire risk that we're trying to mitigate, that we're trying to reduce, versus keep the power on. The same is true for the emergency de-energization. If there's an active wildfire and we're monitoring the fires in our service territory, all right, we talked about the groups that we've set up within Pacific Power to help with that monitoring. But when that active wildfire gets close, Chester showed you an example in California last year where it gets up on the transmission corridor and we have to de-energize for safety. Why is that? Well, it's for the safety of the first responders. It's making sure we're not making the situation worse if that fire actually burns into our corridor, actually burns our structures down, and it was energized, it can make the situation worse. We want to take ourselves out of that equation. But we're doing that with a balanced approach of what is the risk that we're trying to avoid versus the risk of not having power, and when is the right time to make that call, right? That's what this operation practice is looking to achieve. What does it feel like to a customer? Well, it feels like more outages. It feels like longer outages. There is an impact to running these operational practices, and we recognize that, right? And so when our goal is to restore that power as soon as it's safe to do so, right? So like I said, that's been our culture for a long time. It still is with these operating practices for wildfire risk reduction. It still is, but now we have more things to consider. And it's considering the environmental conditions, it's considering where the fire is, and it's taking that all into account now to determine when is it safe to restore the power to an area. That's all going into the decision making. All right, so how many emergency de-energizations have occurred in Yakima so far this year? There's been 7 de-energizations year to date. Some of those have been really big, where we've had a 40,000 customer de-energization where it lasted 4 hours. Some of them have been really small, where it's only impacted 43 customers for 2 hours. We had one this last Saturday, right? 10,000 acre wildfire, where we de-energized, and restoration took 10 hours, 14 hours. So these comes in all shapes and sizes, right? All for mitigating the fire risk. What changes the size of it depends on the characteristics of the fire, where is it going, where is it located in relationship to our lines. All that's taken into consideration when determining how long is the outage going to occur, or who does it impact. When we do an immediate de-energization, we look to quickly de-energize where we have control remotely. So we might have to go back to a substation and de-energize a larger area till we get more information, and then we get back down to the area that needs to be de-energized based on where the fire is at. So there's that initial de-energization, and then we learn more information and we surgically reduce that footprint of the outage. That's how the procedure works. We view this operational practice as an additional layer. When you look at the wildfire mitigation plan, it's all this working in concert. You have the system hardening, you have the situational awareness, you have the operating practices, you have the inspections, you have how we do individual jobs. It's all creating layers of defense so that the potential for a wildfire ignition doesn't get through all those layers. That's the goal. So all of these layer on top of each other to make the system safer as we're operating in the higher wildfire risk times of year. So now I'm going to turn it over to Nora, who's going to talk about that third operational practice, the public safety power shutoff. She's also going to give us some other good preparedness information as well. So Nora, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Can you hear me okay? I have a very quiet voice. If you don't, just wave at me. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. Thank you for wanting to be part of the conversation, caring about wildfire safety, and wanting to hear from us and have a discussion after we're done with our presentations to talk about specifically about your community and ways that we can work together. You heard initially Chester talk about situational awareness and the tools that they provide, and that gives us the ability to actually make decisions. And it goes above and beyond situational awareness. I call it actionable intelligence because it helps us actually make decisions on how we're going to operate our system based on the information from Chester's team. You also heard from Alan talk about the long-term strategy to harden our system so that way we don't have to do these operational practices and our system is ultimately more resilient. But between now and then and that gap and operating in a more volatile sort of environment, our team, emergency management, is tasked with the response and working on any situation that may arise, these practices that Alan talked about. I'm going to talk specifically first about public safety power shutoffs, and I'm not going to dive in too much detail about how we get here with as far as the vegetation, because Chester did a great job covering that. He's much smarter than me when it comes to that. But we take that information, we look at the vegetation, we look at the condition of the weather, the humidity, the heat. Wind is the #1 factor as well, coupled with that. We also look at the terrain. Is it flat grasslands with dense grass and shrubs or brush that if it's a windy day that fire can pick off? You've observed that here recently, unfortunately. Or is it forested, tall, mountainous terrain? Fire loves to go up those as well. So we look at the terrain, the weather conditions, and then we also look at, is it going to impact a community? You've heard about fires in the forest burning or becoming managed or controlled burns because they don't really have an impact and they can be managed and allowed to actually clear some of that vegetation. So if that's the case, we don't necessarily need to act, but if there's an impact to a community or to infrastructure, then we take all of these 3 factors and we make a decision. I'm going to talk through the timeline of what to expect. So public safety power shutoffs have been a tool for us for about 5 years now, since about 2019. We have never done one in Washington. We have done one in Oregon. That was September of 2022, but we have not done a public safety power shutoff in Washington. But I would like to talk with you about what to expect should we have to do one here and how to better prepare. So as Chester talked about, we get weather about 5 days in advance. We have a pretty good idea if those conditions are going to be so extreme. And when you take that 3 factors and you put it all together, we're talking the 1%, the top 1% extreme risk. So it's not very common, but we are seeing conditions change every year. And as we do that, we continue to monitor closely and take action as we need to. Once we get that information, we really focus on what areas may be most impacted. So we know this about 5 days in advance, sometimes 4. Once we have a fine-tuned area, we mitigate and minimize the area that could be impacted as best as we can. We will start working with our public safety partners. That's 3 days in advance, that's 72 hours. So we'll make a call to the state, we'll make a call to the local county emergency manager, any other contacts that we have with the fire department, and we start letting them know that this looks like it's a potential, that in 3 days we're looking at potentially having to shut the power off because it's too dangerous to operate the system under these conditions. So we have that conversation, and we really focus on a couple of things. We focus on what are the critical facilities that can't lose power. Is there a way to help sustain them by bringing in generation, portable generation? Is there a way to make sure that those critical facilities have what they need to operate or make alternate plans? The other thing we talk about is for you, the customers. Do we need to set up a community resource center? This is a place where you can go as a customer to get out of the heat, out of probably smoke. It depends on if there's other activity or other fires in the area. Get Wi-Fi, power your devices, get snacks, refreshments, get information about the situation. These are open during the daytime and evening hours, not overnight, unlike a shelter, but they're a place to go as a resource center. So we work with the local to determine where do we put one of these. Does it make sense to put it in the middle of a town? Does it make sense based on where we're looking at shutting the power off? It doesn't have to be in a building. It can be a big self-sustained tent. We have tents available that we can deploy. And so we make those decisions about 3 days out. And then 2 days out, we start contacting customers. So that would be you. We make direct contact with customers. In addition to media and other types of things that we post, social media, website, we do media releases as well, but we contact customers directly. That's phone call, email, text. Your preference is really important on how you like to receive communications. And we let you know that in 2 days, we're anticipating potentially having to turn the power off due to these conditions. We do this again 24 hours before, and then again 1 to 4 hours before. As you know, weather is changing by the second, so that weather forecasts may shift, and if we don't have to turn the power off, we will also let you know that we won't be turning the power off. Or if the time has shifted, maybe initially we anticipated the strong winds in the morning and now they're coming in early afternoon, we'll shift that timeline. So we make these efforts to keep you informed as we gear up for the potential of the impact. And then we'll make a final notification when we start to de-energize. We've reached that threshold. We're operating out of our emergency coordination center at this time, and we've reached that threshold, and we have to make that decision. I also want you to know that prior to doing this, while we're working to make contact with you, we have our transmission distribution team and our vegetation team. They're out there patrolling the lines. They're inspecting for any trees that may be too close or maybe hazardous that could topple in the wind, or any other conditions that they can fix before to help quicker restore services when the event has passed. So as we go through now, we've made multiple notifications, and we hope at this point in time that that's been a decent opportunity to at least prepare or be aware that this will be happening. Once the event has passed and we get the all clear to go ahead and start restoring, the winds have calmed down, we're able to start turning the power back on. It's also really important to be aware it doesn't happen immediately. This is something that may take some time, and depending on how far you are or how long the line is to get to your home or your residence or your business, it may take some time. So what we do is we get the clear, we let you know we're going to start patrolling and looking at restoring. And what we do is it's called step restoration, where we walk through and we patrol the line and restore up to each point that we can. So sometimes that could be very quick if there's no damage found, but sometimes and often during these events that we've learned is that there's large trees that fall or other debris, and there is damage that needs to be repaired first. So that may delay the restoration timeline, but we would provide updates as we get those as our process works through. So just be aware. Additionally, we can't restore in the dark. We have to have visibility in the daytime because it's really challenging to see in the dark if there's anything damaged with the system, especially the further out you are and if there's any trees or vegetation in the area. So there could be a potentially longer delay, but what we do is we keep you informed throughout the process and let you know as we're working through. And then we'll make one final notification when the PSPS ends and we have your power restored. And we do this really for two reasons. Primarily to let you know if you've left home, if you've chosen to go somewhere else, it's now safe to come home because your power is back on. Also, if your power is not on, to call us so we can troubleshoot and make sure that we do get your power back on, because we do have some situations where that may be the case. So as you can see here, it's a planned outage when we have extreme conditions. Again, we haven't done one in Washington, but we do want to make you aware of the timeline and what to really expect with that. Also, I'd like to take a moment to just let you know how important it is at this time that we have your updated contact information. If you're like me, you sign up for electricity and then you forget about it. You may change your email, you may change your phone, you may have somebody else, come into in your home or your situation. So it's really important that we have your updated contact information, because we do reach out directly based on what you've given us. And tonight we have customer service in the back of the room here. You're welcome to, instead of going home and checking online or calling them later, you're welcome to talk with them now. You can talk with them about verifying your information or updating it, or if you have other questions so they can answer. So they're here tonight, and I encourage afterwards to go and pay a visit and talk to them. So now that you know why it's important for us to have your contact information, hopefully I want to talk about understanding why it's also important for us to know if you have any members of your family, yourself, any friends, any neighbors that rely on electricity for medical devices. This is really important for us to understand, because during a public safety power shutoff, we do contact those individuals by phone. We'll have a customer service agent call them and speak to them, not the automated phone call that everybody would get, but we would have a conversation with them so they understand the situation and they have resources, and if they don't, we can help get them resources during the event. But there is no database for us to know automatically. Obviously, that information isn't shared for privacy reasons, so we do require that customers let us know of their situation. There's a QR code here. It may be hard to see, but rest assured there's a brochure back here. It's one side English, one side Spanish. I encourage you to take multiple copies of it. Bring them to your friends, your family, your neighbors. I know we have members from the health department in the back of the room here as well, and we encourage you to bring that information back with you and share with your network, so that way we're aware of where our most vulnerable customers are and how we can reach them. And just make sure that when and if the situation comes that we do need to plan a power shutoff, that they have the right information and resources available to them. So I want to make sure to share that, and you can also talk to customer service about signing up for that as well if you have the need to do so tonight. So now we're going to talk a little bit about quizzes, and I'm going to ask you some questions. How many of you in this room have an emergency plan? Okay, thank you. Thank you for being honest. I appreciate that. I would really like to encourage you, an emergency plan does take a little bit of time and effort, but it's free. There's many templates online. I would encourage you, after tonight, if you have not done so, or even if you have a plan, revisit it and see if it's still current. There's a lot of things to take away from that. It's, considerations. So if you had to evacuate and you couldn't get home, where are you going to meet with everybody? What's a safe place to meet? If, if you ended up having different hazards in the area, does everybody in your family or your immediate network know what to do with those hazards? Does everybody know what to do with power outages? Does everybody know what to do with obviously we have landslide risk not far from here. We have flooding, we had wildfire, a variety of different hazards. Know about those and know about what to do. Do you have everybody's phone number memorized, or do you have it written down somewhere? I mean, in the day of cell phones, who knows all these numbers in your cell phones? What if, even if it's not an emergency and you lose your cell phone or you can't get access to it? How do you contact the most important people? Do you have your insurance information, your medication information? Those are all things that we take for granted that we have available at our fingertips on a day-to-day basis, but an emergency plan is really kind of building that database for yourself and having it on a hard piece of paper, so that way if you lose that connection, you still have that information. It's a great way to feel, more resilient, more comfort in the fact that you, even if you just lose your phone, you'll have that information. Next, I'd like to ask, how many of you have an emergency kit, whether it's a go kit or a home kit? Okay, thank you. This one is a little bit more daunting and it does take a little bit more time, but again, highly encourage it, either whether it's a go kit, it's a backpack for a couple of days, to sustain you if you can't get home and if you have to evacuate. Or if you're stuck at home, a couple weeks worth of food, non-perishable things that you like to eat, right? Not those MREs, things that are tasty. Thinking about your kids, if you have, grandchildren, kids, some comfort toys. It's really scary for kids in disasters, and it's really important for them to have comfort items that they're familiar with or that, that can make them feel safe. Just having assistive devices for those that may have people that need some help with either walking or evacuating or need medication. Having extra supplies of those. Again, really important. I find I used my Go Kit nonstop when I had kids in soccer when they were younger, because they were always getting hurt or were always getting stuck in traffic or they're always hungry. But it's again worth day to day for you as well as during disaster, and it's just one of those things that you can help build up your resilience in your family and your comfort. Now I'd like to move outside the home. For those of you that are fortunate to have land, do people here practice defensible space? Okay, right. Defensible space is a great concept. It's really the way you manage vegetation around your home, starting closest to your home and then building out. And it really has been proven as one of the ways to protect your home during an active wildfire. So I encourage you that has the ability or has land or around you to practice that measure. We do have some brochures in the back as well related to trees and locations and how they can assist with creating that space and around especially electrical lines. But again, highly encourage that you take a look at practicing that, because it has been proven to be effective. And then even if you don't have land, but you can still walk around the community, you can still go in the areas. If you see something like this on a blue sky day where you have obstructions or trees or anything that could potentially pose a danger to a line, imagine if it gets windier and imagine if it gets stormier out. This is an immediate hazard. We do patrol, we do have eyes on, but we can't be everywhere all at once. So we do encourage you to report any dangerous conditions with the equipment. Mitigating this and fixing this today versus waiting for the next storm to take it down will save potentially some significant outages and a lot of frustration and time. So highly encourage you to be aware and be the eyes on the community. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. And again, I want to encourage you a couple of things quickly is make sure you have your contact information updated, because that is our way to contact you, and that's the way that we communicate directly with you. Customer service is in the back of the room to help, also for any other questions. Make sure that you give us or you encourage any family members, friends, relatives, neighbors, if they are vulnerable or require medical equipment to be on electricity, that they let us know this so that we're aware, and that way we can reach out to them directly during times where they have extended power outages and a planned shutoff. And then always encourage you to create a plan and a kit and look out for hazards. So thank you for your time. I'll pass it back to Simon so we can start the conversation.